Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who cause the deepest wounds. I learned this truth on a gray Thursday morning in February, when my sister Jessica knocked on my door with tears in her eyes and a document that would change everything. She clutched a medical power of attorney form in her trembling hands, claiming that our brother Marcus was suffering too much from his recent accident and needed someone to make decisions for him. What she didn't realize was that she had just declared war on the wrong person. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Victoria Chen, and at 54, I thought I had seen the worst of human nature during my 28 years as a nurse practitioner. I'd witnessed families turn against each other in hospital corridors, watched greed disguise itself as concern, and seen how quickly compassion could transform into manipulation when money was involved. But nothing had prepared me for the moment when my own sister would attempt to exploit our brother's vulnerability for her own financial gain. Marcus had always been the golden child in our family. At 48, he was a successful software engineer who had built a thriving consulting business from nothing, transforming small companies' digital infrastructure across the Pacific Northwest. His Mount Vernon home sat on 12 acres of pristine land, complete with a restored farmhouse that he had spent 5 years renovating with his own hands. More importantly, Marcus had never married and had no children, making his considerable assets particularly attractive to certain family members who had been watching and waiting. The accident had happened 3 weeks earlier on a rain-slicked highway outside Bellingham. A semi-truck had jackknifed during a sudden winter storm, and Marcus's Jeep had been caught in the resulting pile-up. He survived but barely. Multiple fractures in his right leg, a severe concussion, and internal injuries that required 2 emergency surgeries. The doctors at Harborview Medical Center had been cautiously optimistic about his recovery, but the healing process would be long and complicated. I had been at his bedside every day since the accident, taking leave from my position at the Whatcom County Health Clinic to coordinate his care. As a medical professional, I understood the complexities of his injuries and could communicate effectively with his treatment team. Marcus trusted me implicitly, often saying that having his big sister advocate for him made the entire ordeal bearable. What neither of us anticipated was that Jessica would see his temporary incapacitation as an opportunity rather than a tragedy. Jessica had always struggled financially despite her husband Brandon's decent income as a middle school principal. Their spending habits consistently outpaced their earnings, and they carried substantial credit card debt from years of living beyond their means. Their Linwood home was mortgaged to its maximum value, and their 2 teenage daughters required constant financial support for activities, clothes, and college preparation. Over the years, Jessica had frequently asked Marcus for loans, which he had generously provided without expecting repayment. The power of attorney document she presented that February morning was supposedly designed to help manage Marcus's affairs during his recovery. She explained through practiced tears that the medical bills were mounting, his business clients were becoming impatient, and someone needed to take control before everything collapsed. She positioned herself as the obvious choice since she lived closest to Mount Vernon and had more flexible work arrangements as a part-time bookkeeper. What Jessica failed to mention was that she had already contacted Marcus's financial advisor to inquire about liquidating his investment portfolio. She had also scheduled meetings with 2 different real estate agents to discuss the potential sale of his property. Most disturbing of all, she had researched long-term care facilities, claiming that Marcus would never fully recover and would require permanent institutional care. Her research had nothing to do with his medical needs and everything to do with freeing up his assets for her management. I discovered these activities purely by accident when Marcus's financial advisor, Patricia Reeves, called me directly with concerns about Jessica's inquiries. Patricia had worked with Marcus for over a decade and found Jessica's urgency suspicious given that Marcus was expected to make a substantial recovery. The timing felt premature, and the financial strategies Jessica proposed seemed designed to benefit someone other than Marcus himself. That phone call from Patricia triggered something deep within me, a protective instinct honed by years of advocating for vulnerable patients against systems and individuals who would exploit their weakness. I realized that Jessica wasn't just attempting to help Marcus during a difficult time. She was positioning herself to gain control of his assets while he was unable to defend himself, using his temporary incapacitation as justification for permanent financial control. The medical power of attorney document itself raised immediate red flags when I examined it closely. The language was far broader than necessary for medical decision-making, including provisions for financial management that seemed excessive for someone expected to recover fully. More concerning was the fact that Jessica had prepared the document without consulting Marcus about his preferences or involving him in any meaningful way in the decision-making process. When I raised these concerns with Jessica, her defensive response confirmed my growing suspicions. Instead of addressing the specific issues I had identified, she attacked my motives and questioned my understanding of Marcus's situation. She accused me of being territorial about my role as his medical advocate and suggested that my nursing background made me overprotective and suspicious of normal family assistance. Her dismissive attitude toward my professional expertise was particularly telling. Jessica had always resented my education and career success, frequently making comments about how I thought I was better than everyone else because I had advanced degrees and professional credentials. This resentment had simmered beneath the surface of our relationship for decades, occasionally erupting during family gatherings when she felt overshadowed by my achievements. The confrontation escalated when I refused to support her power of attorney petition. Jessica's mask of concerned sisterly love slipped completely, revealing the calculating opportunist underneath. She informed me coldly that Marcus was suffering too much to make rational decisions and that his recovery was uncertain at best. She claimed that liquidating his assets now would ensure his long-term care needs were met, even if he never regained full independence. Her clinical assessment of our brother's future prospects betrayed her true motivations. Jessica wasn't planning for Marcus's recovery, she was planning for his permanent incapacitation because that scenario served her financial interests. A fully recovered Marcus would reclaim control of his assets and discover her exploitation. A permanently disabled Marcus would require the ongoing financial management she was positioning herself to provide. I left that meeting with a clear understanding that Jessica had declared war on our family's integrity, using Marcus's vulnerability as her weapon of choice. What she failed to understand was that she had chosen the wrong opponent for this particular battle. While Jessica saw a middle-aged nurse who could be manipulated or intimidated into compliance, I saw myself as Marcus's shield against predatory behavior that threatened his autonomy and financial security. My nursing career had taught me to assess threats quickly and respond strategically to protect my patients from harm. The skills I had developed advocating for vulnerable individuals in healthcare settings would now be applied to protecting my brother from exploitation by our own sister. Jessica assumed that family loyalty would prevent me from taking decisive action against her schemes. She was about to learn that my loyalty was to Marcus's best interests, not to maintaining false family harmony. The transformation began that very afternoon when I returned to Marcus's hospital room with a new sense of purpose. Instead of simply providing emotional support and medical advocacy, I would now need to serve as his financial protector and legal guardian against threats he couldn't yet perceive. The recovery period ahead would be about more than healing his physical injuries, it would be about preserving his autonomy and assets from a sister who had mistaken his temporary vulnerability for permanent opportunity. I spent that evening researching legal protections for incapacitated individuals, consulting with attorneys who specialized in elder abuse and financial exploitation. While Marcus wasn't elderly, the same legal principles applied to anyone temporarily unable to protect their interests from predatory family members. The more I learned about financial exploitation tactics, the more clearly I could see Jessica's strategy unfolding. Her approach was textbook manipulation of vulnerable individuals. Create urgency around financial decisions, position herself as the only viable solution, isolate the victim from other potential advocates, and establish legal control before anyone could interfere. The fact that she was employing these tactics against our own brother while he lay recovering from life-threatening injuries revealed a level of calculated selfishness that left me breathless. But Jessica had made one critical miscalculation. She assumed that I would either support her plans out of family loyalty or step aside to avoid conflict.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
She failed to recognize that my professional training and personal integrity would compel me to fight against anyone who threatened Marcus's well-being, regardless of our relationship. More importantly, she underestimated my capacity for strategic thinking and my access to professional networks that could counter her schemes. The next morning, I began building the case that would ultimately protect Marcus and expose Jessica's exploitation attempts. I started by documenting every conversation, every suspicious action, and every inconsistency in her stated motivations. My nursing background had taught me the importance of contemporaneous documentation in protecting patients from harmful interventions, and I applied those same principles to protecting my brother from his predatory sister. I also reached out to Marcus's established support network, beginning with Patricia Reeves, his financial advisor. Patricia confirmed that Jessica had indeed contacted her about liquidating Marcus's investment portfolio, claiming immediate financial needs that didn't align with his actual medical situation. She had been uncomfortable with Jessica's requests but felt obligated to at least listen since she identified herself as Marcus's sister and claimed to have his best interests in mind. The conversation with Patricia revealed the scope of Jessica's financial ambitions. She hadn't just inquired about liquidating investments, she had asked about the total value of Marcus's assets, including his property, business equity, and retirement accounts. Her questions suggested someone conducting due diligence for a comprehensive asset seizure rather than someone seeking to cover temporary medical expenses. This information transformed my understanding of Jessica's motivations from opportunistic greed to systematic predation. She wasn't simply trying to help herself to some of Marcus's money during a vulnerable period, she was positioning herself to gain control of his entire financial empire by exploiting his temporary incapacitation. The power of attorney document was just the first step in a comprehensive plan to assume permanent control over his assets. Armed with this knowledge, I began developing a counter-strategy that would protect Marcus's interests while exposing Jessica's true motivations. The battle lines were drawn and Jessica had no idea that her target had a fiercely protective sister with the knowledge, skills, and determination to fight back against her exploitation schemes. Marcus remained largely unaware of this brewing conflict, focused as he was on his physical recovery and managing the considerable pain from his injuries. His trust in family members remained intact, making him particularly vulnerable to Jessica's manipulation tactics. This innocence would both complicate my protective efforts and fuel my determination to shield him from his sister's predatory behavior. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Jessica had claimed that Marcus was suffering too much to protect himself, using his pain as justification for seizing control of his life. What she failed to understand was that her actions would ultimately cause far more suffering than his accident ever could. The betrayal of family trust, the violation of his autonomy, and the attempted theft of his life's work would inflict wounds that would take far longer to heal than any physical injuries. But Jessica's suffering was only just beginning. While she focused on executing her exploitation schemes, I was quietly building the foundation for her exposure and defeat. The sister she had dismissed as an obstacle to her financial ambitions was about to become the architect of her downfall. Marcus's temporary vulnerability had given Jessica an opportunity, but it had also awakened a protective force she was completely unprepared to face. The next phase of this conflict would test every skill I had developed as a healthcare advocate, and every ounce of determination I possessed as a protective sister. Jessica had started this war with the assumption that Marcus's suffering made him an easy target. She was about to discover that his suffering had created a formidable opponent who would stop at nothing to preserve his dignity, autonomy, and financial security. The woman who had walked into my home that February morning with crocodile tears and fraudulent documents had awakened something fierce and protective within me. While Jessica plotted to exploit our brother's weakness, I was preparing to demonstrate exactly what happened when someone threatened the people I was sworn to protect. She had chosen her battlefield poorly, and the consequences of that choice were about to unfold in ways she never anticipated. Marcus's recovery would continue, but the real healing would begin when his sister's predatory schemes were exposed and defeated. The suffering she claimed to want to alleviate through her financial control would pale in comparison to the consequences she would face for attempting to exploit his vulnerability. Jessica had declared that Marcus was suffering too much to defend himself. She was about to learn that she had gravely underestimated both his resilience and the protective power of a sister who refused to let family predators succeed. The transformation from concerned sister to strategic defender happened gradually over the following days as I systematically uncovered the depth of Jessica's deception. My first priority was gathering intelligence about her activities while maintaining the appearance of normal family cooperation. Years of navigating hospital politics and advocating for patients against institutional resistance had taught me the value of information gathering before revealing my hand. I began by conducting what I called reconnaissance visits to Marcus's property under the guise of checking on his mail and ensuring the house remained secure. What I discovered there confirmed my worst suspicions about Jessica's intentions. Hidden in Marcus's home office desk, I found printouts of real estate listings for comparable properties in the Mount Vernon area, all with handwritten notes about market values and potential sale prices. The papers were in Jessica's distinctive handwriting, complete with calculations showing how quickly various properties had sold and for what percentage of their asking prices. More damning was a folder containing information about assisted living facilities throughout Western Washington, with particular attention paid to those that accepted long-term residents with complex medical needs. The facilities Jessica had researched were not rehabilitation centers focused on helping patients regain independence. They were permanent care institutions designed for individuals who would never return to independent living. Her research suggested she was planning for Marcus to require institutional care for the rest of his life, despite medical opinions that contradicted this pessimistic prognosis. The most disturbing discovery was a handwritten timeline in Jessica's notebook that outlined her strategy for gaining control of Marcus's assets. The timeline began with obtaining power of attorney and proceeded through liquidating his investment portfolio, selling his property, and establishing what she called long-term care funding. The final entry on her timeline was particularly chilling: transfer remaining assets to family trust for ongoing management. There was no provision in her planning for Marcus ever regaining control of his own financial affairs. This documentation revealed that Jessica's concern for Marcus's well-being was entirely fabricated. She had developed a comprehensive plan to assume permanent control of his assets by exploiting his temporary incapacitation. The power of attorney she had presented was not a tool for helping Marcus during his recovery, but rather the first step in a systematic asset seizure that would leave him financially dependent on her decisions for the rest of his life. Armed with this evidence, I began building relationships with the professional network that surrounded Marcus's life and business. My first ally was Patricia Reeves, his financial advisor, who had already expressed concerns about Jessica's inquiries. Patricia agreed to meet with me privately to discuss the situation, and during that conversation, I learned even more disturbing details about Jessica's activities. Patricia revealed that Jessica had called her office multiple times over the past week, claiming to have urgent authorization to access Marcus's accounts. When Patricia explained that she would need to see proper documentation before discussing any financial matters, Jessica had become increasingly aggressive and demanding. She had threatened to report Patricia to regulatory authorities for interfering with family medical decisions and had suggested that Patricia's reluctance to cooperate was prolonging Marcus's suffering. The manipulation tactics Jessica employed with Patricia were identical to those she had used with me, creating false urgency around Marcus's condition and positioning anyone who questioned her authority as obstacles to his care. This pattern of behavior confirmed that Jessica had developed a systematic approach to gaining control of Marcus's assets, using emotional manipulation and false medical claims to pressure professionals into compliance. Patricia also shared information that Jessica couldn't have known I would discover. During their conversations, Jessica had asked detailed questions about Marcus's business accounts, retirement funds, and investment portfolio values. Her questions weren't focused on covering immediate medical expenses or ensuring his bills were paid during recovery. Instead, she was conducting a comprehensive asset assessment to determine the total value of what she could potentially control. Most telling was Jessica's inquiry about Marcus's business partnership agreements and client contracts. She had asked Patricia whether Marcus's consulting business could continue operating without his direct involvement and what would happen to his client relationships if he became permanently unable to work. These questions revealed that Jessica was already planning to take over or liquidate his business interests, despite medical predictions that he would be able to return to work within 6 months. My next step was connecting with Dr. Amanda Sullivan, the orthopedic surgeon managing Marcus's recovery. As a fellow healthcare professional, I was able to discuss his case in clinical terms that revealed the disconnect between Jessica's claims about his prognosis and the actual medical reality. Sullivan confirmed that while Marcus's injuries were serious, there was no indication that he would require permanent institutional care or be unable to manage his own affairs once healed. Dr. Sullivan also shared concerning information about Jessica's interactions with the medical team. She had repeatedly pressed doctors for worst-case scenario discussions and had seemed disappointed when they provided optimistic recovery timelines. During family conferences about Marcus's care, Jessica had focused on potential complications and long-term disabilities rather than celebrating the positive progress he was making. The surgeon's observations aligned perfectly with my own assessment of Jessica's motivations. She wasn't seeking accurate medical information to support Marcus's recovery, she was looking for medical justification for her plans to assume permanent control of his affairs. When the actual medical professionals contradicted her narrative about his need for long-term care, she became argumentative and suggested they were being unrealistically optimistic. This pattern of behavior extended to Jessica's interactions with the hospital's case management team. Social worker Catherine Mills confided that Jessica had repeatedly asked about guardianship procedures for patients who lacked capacity to make decisions. When Catherine explained that Marcus was fully competent to make his own decisions despite his physical injuries, Jessica had argued that his pain medication was affecting his judgment and that family members needed to step in to protect his interests. Catherine's professional training in identifying financial exploitation of vulnerable adults had triggered her own concerns about Jessica's behavior. She noted that Jessica's questions about guardianship and asset protection were inconsistent with someone genuinely focused on Marcus's medical recovery. Instead, her inquiries suggested someone positioning themselves to gain legal control over another person's financial affairs during a temporary vulnerability. The information-gathering phase of my counter-strategy extended to Marcus's business relationships as well. I contacted his primary business partner David Kim, who had been managing client relationships during Marcus's recovery. David revealed that Jessica had already approached him about potentially buying out Marcus's share of their consulting partnership, claiming that Marcus's injuries would prevent him from ever returning to full-time work. David had been shocked by Jessica's approach, particularly since Marcus's doctors had been consistently optimistic about his recovery timeline. When David had suggested waiting until Marcus was able to participate in any business discussions, Jessica had become insistent that decisions needed to be made immediately to protect everyone's interests. She had even suggested that delaying these decisions was cruel to Marcus because it gave him false hope about his recovery prospects. The conversation with David revealed another layer of Jessica's strategy. She wasn't just planning to control Marcus's existing assets, she was actively working to liquidate his business interests while he was unable to defend them. Her approach to David demonstrated the same pattern of creating false urgency and positioning herself as the only person capable of making rational decisions about Marcus's future. As my investigation continued, I discovered that Jessica had also contacted Marcus's insurance company to inquire about disability benefits and long-term care coverage. Her questions to the insurance representatives focused on permanent disability scenarios rather than temporary recovery support. She had specifically asked about policies that would provide ongoing payments for individuals who could never return to work, despite medical evidence suggesting Marcus would make a full recovery. The insurance company representative, Maria Santos, had found Jessica's inquiries unusual because they contradicted the medical reports on file. When Maria had explained that Marcus's injuries didn't qualify for permanent disability benefits based on current medical assessments, Jessica had argued that the doctors were being overly optimistic and that the family needed to plan for worst-case scenarios. Maria's professional experience with disability fraud had raised red flags about Jessica's approach. She noted that legitimate family members typically focused on understanding available support during recovery periods, while individuals with ulterior motives often pushed for permanent disability classifications that would justify long-term control over the victim's affairs. This pattern of behavior across multiple professional relationships painted a clear picture of Jessica's systematic approach to exploiting Marcus's vulnerability. She had contacted every professional in his network with consistent messages about his dire prognosis and the need for immediate family intervention. When professionals contradicted her pessimistic assessments, she became argumentative and suggested they didn't understand the full scope of his condition. The intelligence I gathered during this phase revealed that Jessica's exploitation scheme was far more comprehensive than I had initially realized. She wasn't simply trying to gain temporary control during Marcus's recovery, she was working to establish permanent legal and financial control by convincing everyone in his professional network that he would never regain capacity to manage his own affairs. Armed with this documentation, I began developing the legal strategy that would protect Marcus from Jessica's predatory behavior. My first consultation was with Rebecca Martinez, an attorney who specialized in financial exploitation cases involving family members. Rebecca confirmed that Jessica's actions constituted clear patterns of attempted financial exploitation, even though Marcus hadn't yet suffered actual financial losses. Rebecca explained that the law recognized attempted financial exploitation as seriously as completed exploitation, particularly when the intended victim was temporarily vulnerable due to medical conditions. The evidence I had gathered about Jessica's comprehensive planning and systematic approach to gaining control of Marcus's assets would be sufficient to obtain protective legal orders preventing her from accessing his accounts or property. More importantly, Rebecca confirmed that the power of attorney document Jessica had prepared was legally problematic. The broad financial authority it granted was excessive for someone who only needed to make medical decisions, and the timing of its preparation during Marcus's vulnerability raised questions about his capacity to provide informed consent. Any court reviewing the document would likely find it suspicious given the comprehensive nature of Jessica's other activities. The legal consultation revealed strategic options I hadn't previously considered. Rather than simply defending against Jessica's power of attorney petition, I could proactively seek a protective order that would prevent her from accessing Marcus's assets while he completed his recovery. This approach would shift the burden to Jessica to prove that her intervention was necessary and beneficial, rather than requiring me to prove that her actions were harmful. Rebecca also suggested involving adult protective services in the investigation. While Marcus wasn't elderly, the same legal protections applied to any adult who was temporarily unable to protect themselves from financial exploitation. An official APS investigation would create a formal record of Jessica's predatory behavior and could result in criminal charges if her activities constituted financial crimes. The strategic planning phase culminated in my decision to confront Jessica directly about her activities before taking legal action. This confrontation would serve multiple purposes. It would give her an opportunity to abandon her exploitation scheme voluntarily. It would force her to reveal more about her plans and motivations, and it would demonstrate to any future legal proceedings that I had attempted to resolve the situation through family discussion before involving authorities. I arranged to meet Jessica at a neutral location, a coffee shop in downtown Bellingham, where our conversation couldn't be overheard by Marcus or other family members. My approach was carefully planned to appear collaborative while actually gathering additional evidence about her intentions and the scope of her planning. When Jessica arrived for our meeting, her demeanor was noticeably different from our previous interactions. The emotional manipulation and false concern had been replaced by a businesslike attitude that suggested she felt confident about her control over the situation. She brought a briefcase containing what she described as important documents that needed to be discussed and signed before Marcus's condition deteriorated further. The documents Jessica presented revealed the full scope of her exploitation plan. In addition to the power of attorney, she had prepared property transfer documents that would give her immediate control over Marcus's real estate, investment account authorizations that would allow her to liquidate his portfolio, and business partnership agreements that would transfer his consulting income to her management. She had even prepared preliminary applications for long-term care facilities, complete with financial information that would commit Marcus to institutional care regardless of his actual recovery progress. Jessica's presentation of these documents was accompanied by renewed claims about Marcus's dire condition and the urgent need for family intervention. She argued that his injuries were more serious than the doctors were admitting, and that his pain medication was affecting his ability to make rational decisions. She positioned herself as the only family member with the practical experience and emotional strength to handle the difficult decisions that lay ahead. The clinical detachment with which Jessica discussed Marcus's future was chilling. She spoke about liquidating his assets and arranging institutional care as if these were inevitable medical necessities rather than choices being made for her financial benefit. When I questioned the urgency of these decisions given his positive recovery trajectory, she dismissed my concerns as naive optimism that wasn't helping Marcus face reality. Most revealing was Jessica's reaction when I refused to support her plans. The mask of concerned family cooperation dropped completely, revealing the calculating opportunist underneath. She informed me that she had already consulted with an attorney about gaining legal guardianship over Marcus if family cooperation couldn't be achieved. Her threat was clear: either I supported her voluntary control over his affairs, or she would seek court-ordered control that would be even more comprehensive. Jessica's transformation during this confrontation confirmed everything I had suspected about her true motivations. The emotional manipulation she had employed earlier was simply a tool to gain compliance with her asset seizure plans. When that approach failed, she was prepared to use legal coercion to achieve the same goals. Her willingness to seek guardianship over a competent adult revealed the depth of her predatory intentions. The meeting concluded with Jessica giving me an ultimatum. She expected my signed support for her power of attorney petition within 24 hours, along with my agreement not to interfere with her management of Marcus's affairs. If I refused to cooperate, she would file for emergency guardianship claiming that Marcus's condition was deteriorating, and that family conflict was preventing necessary medical and financial decisions. This ultimatum provided the final piece of evidence I needed to proceed with legal action against Jessica's exploitation scheme. Her threat to seek guardianship over a competent adult, simply to gain control of his assets, constituted attempted financial exploitation under state law. More importantly, her willingness to make false claims about Marcus's mental capacity to achieve her goals demonstrated the calculating nature of her predatory behavior. I left that meeting with absolute clarity about the path forward. Jessica had revealed the full scope of her exploitation plans and had threatened to use legal coercion if voluntary cooperation couldn't be achieved. She had also demonstrated that she viewed Marcus not as a beloved brother recovering from injuries, but as a financial opportunity that needed to be seized before he regained the ability to protect himself. The intelligence-gathering phase of my counter-strategy was complete. I now had comprehensive documentation of Jessica's systematic approach to exploiting Marcus's vulnerability, evidence of her contacts with his professional network, and recordings of her explicit threats to seek legal control over his affairs. Most importantly, I had confirmation that her actions constituted criminal financial exploitation under state law. The next phase would involve activating the legal and professional protections available to vulnerable adults, while simultaneously building the case that would expose Jessica's predatory behavior to criminal prosecution. She had spent weeks planning her exploitation scheme while assuming that family loyalty would prevent me from taking decisive action against her. She was about to discover that her assumption was fatally flawed. Marcus remained largely unaware of this brewing legal battle, focused as he was on his physical therapy and recovery milestones. His trust in family members remained intact, making him particularly vulnerable to Jessica's manipulation if she succeeded in gaining legal control over his affairs. This innocence added urgency to my protective efforts, while reinforcing my determination to shield him from his sister's predatory schemes. The woman who had approached me with crocodile tears and fraudulent documents had revealed herself to be a systematic predator willing to exploit her own brother's vulnerability for financial gain. Her confident threats and detailed exploitation plans demonstrated that she viewed his temporary incapacitation as a business opportunity rather than a family tragedy. She had declared war on Marcus's autonomy and financial security, but she had chosen her opponent poorly. The next phase of this conflict would test every skill I had developed as a healthcare advocate, and every ounce of protective determination I possessed as a devoted sister. Jessica's exploitation scheme was comprehensive and well-planned, but it was built on the assumption that no one would challenge her authority or question her motivations. That assumption was about to be shattered by a protective force she had completely underestimated. While Jessica focused on executing her asset seizure plans, I was preparing to demonstrate exactly what happened when someone threatened a person under my protection. The sister she had dismissed as an obstacle to her financial ambitions was about to become the architect of her exposure and defeat. Marcus's suffering had given Jessica an opportunity, but it had also awakened a defensive capability she was entirely unprepared to face. The formal legal battle began the Monday morning after Jessica's ultimatum expired without my compliance. I had spent the weekend finalizing my protective strategy with Rebecca Martinez, ensuring that every document was properly prepared and every potential challenge had been anticipated. At precisely 9 o'clock, Rebecca filed a comprehensive petition with Skagit County Superior Court seeking an emergency protective order preventing Jessica from accessing any of Marcus's assets or attempting to gain legal control over his affairs. The petition included sworn affidavits from Patricia Reeves documenting Jessica's suspicious financial inquiries, statements from Dr. Sullivan confirming Marcus's cognitive competency and positive recovery prognosis, and detailed evidence of Jessica's systematic exploitation planning that I had gathered during my investigation. Most importantly, it included audio recordings of Jessica's explicit threats to seek guardianship if voluntary cooperation couldn't be achieved, captured during our confrontational meeting using my phone's recording application. Judge Margaret Thompson scheduled an emergency hearing for that same afternoon, recognizing the urgency of preventing financial exploitation while the intended victim remained physically vulnerable. The speed of the court's response surprised even Rebecca, who explained that judges took allegations of family financial exploitation particularly seriously given the difficulty of recovering assets once they had been improperly transferred. Jessica's reaction to being served with court papers was swift and predictably aggressive. Within hours of receiving the documents, she contacted Dr. Sullivan's office demanding an immediate meeting to discuss Marcus's deteriorating mental condition. When the medical staff refused to schedule such a meeting without Marcus's explicit consent, Jessica threatened to file complaints with the state medical board alleging inadequate care and poor communication with family members. Her desperate attempt to create medical documentation supporting her guardianship claims revealed how unprepared she was for organized legal resistance. Jessica had planned her exploitation scheme assuming that no one would challenge her authority or question her motivations. When faced with formal legal proceedings that required evidence and professional testimony, she had no legitimate foundation to support her claims about Marcus's incapacity. The emergency hearing convened at 2 o'clock that afternoon in a packed courtroom that drew attention from court reporters covering the unusual case of siblings fighting over asset protection rather than inheritance distribution. Judge Thompson, a veteran family court jurist known for her sharp questioning and intolerance for manipulation, reviewed the extensive documentation before hearing testimony from the parties involved. Jessica appeared with Stanley Preston, a lawyer known for aggressive tactics in guardianship cases but with a reputation that raised questions about his ethical standards. Preston's opening statement attempted to reframe Jessica's activities as legitimate family planning necessitated by Marcus's serious injuries and uncertain recovery prospects. He argued that Victoria's legal action was motivated by sibling rivalry and a desire to control Marcus's care decisions rather than genuine concern for his welfare. The strategy of portraying me as the problematic family member might have been effective if not for the overwhelming evidence documenting Jessica's systematic exploitation planning. When Judge Thompson asked Preston to explain his client's research into assisted living facilities for a patient expected to make a full recovery, he struggled to provide coherent justification for Jessica's pessimistic assumptions about Marcus's prognosis. Rebecca's presentation of our case was methodical and devastating. She walked the court through Jessica's activities chronologically, demonstrating how each action supported a comprehensive plan to gain permanent control over Marcus's assets rather than temporary assistance during his recovery. The timeline revealed a level of premeditation that contradicted Jessica's claims about responding to urgent medical necessities. The turning point in the hearing came when Dr. Sullivan testified via telephone about Marcus's actual medical condition and recovery timeline. Her clinical assessment directly contradicted Jessica's claims about his need for long-term institutional care or his inability to make rational decisions about his own affairs. When Preston attempted to suggest that Dr. Sullivan was being overly optimistic, she responded with detailed medical evidence supporting her prognosis and professional standards requiring honest communication with patients and families. Patricia Reeves's testimony about Jessica's financial inquiries provided additional evidence of systematic asset evaluation rather than emergency medical planning. Patricia's professional experience with legitimate family financial management during medical crises highlighted the suspicious nature of Jessica's approach and her focus on liquidating assets rather than preserving them for Marcus's benefit. The most damaging testimony came from my own presentation of the audio recordings from Jessica's ultimatum meeting. The court heard Jessica explicitly threatening to seek guardianship if voluntary cooperation couldn't be achieved, revealing her willingness to use legal coercion to gain control over Marcus's affairs. Her callous discussion of liquidating his assets and arranging institutional care despite positive medical prognoses demonstrated clear predatory motivations. Judge Thompson's questioning of Jessica directly exposed the weaknesses in her position. When asked to explain why she had researched property sales before consulting medical professionals about Marcus's long-term care needs, Jessica struggled to provide coherent justification for her priorities. Her defensive responses and inability to explain the timing of her various activities created an increasingly unfavorable impression with the court. The judge's most pointed questions concerned Jessica's financial motivations and potential conflicts of interest. When Thompson inquired about Jessica's own financial situation and potential benefits from gaining control over Marcus's assets, Preston objected strenuously, but the damage was already done. Jessica's visible discomfort with questions about her personal finances suggested that her exploitation scheme was motivated by her own financial pressures rather than Marcus's needs. The hearing concluded with Judge Thompson issuing a comprehensive temporary restraining order that exceeded even our most optimistic expectations. The order prohibited Jessica from contacting any of Marcus's financial institutions, prevented her from accessing his property, and specifically banned her from pursuing guardianship proceedings without explicit court approval following a comprehensive medical evaluation by court-appointed professionals. More significantly, Judge Thompson ordered an investigation by Adult Protective Services into allegations of attempted financial exploitation, recognizing that Jessica's activities potentially constituted criminal behavior under state elder abuse statutes. The court also appointed an independent advocate to monitor Marcus's recovery and ensure that his rights were protected during his continued rehabilitation. Jessica's reaction to the court order was immediate and revealing. Instead of accepting the legal determination and focusing on supporting Marcus's recovery through appropriate channels, she launched a campaign of harassment and intimidation designed to pressure me into withdrawing my protective legal action. Her response confirmed that her primary concern was regaining access to Marcus's assets rather than genuinely supporting his well-being. The harassment began with daily phone calls questioning my motives and demanding that I explain my interference with family financial planning. When I refused to engage with these manipulative conversations, Jessica escalated to contacting my employer at the Whatcom County Health Clinic, claiming that my actions were causing Marcus additional stress that was hindering his recovery. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, my supervisor at the clinic, called me into her office to discuss Jessica's complaints. However, as a healthcare professional herself, Dr. Walsh immediately recognized the manipulation tactics Jessica was employing and the legitimate nature of my protective actions. Instead of disciplining me for family conflicts, Dr. Walsh offered additional leave time to ensure I could continue advocating for Marcus without employment pressures. Jessica's campaign extended to other family members and mutual friends, attempting to build support for her narrative that I was interfering with necessary family assistance during Marcus's recovery. Her storytelling to extended family portrayed me as controlling and paranoid, while presenting herself as the concerned sister trying to help Marcus navigate complex financial decisions during his vulnerability. The extended family members who knew me well immediately questioned Jessica's version of events, recognizing that my nursing background and protective nature made her characterization implausible. However, some distant relatives and family friends initially accepted her manipulative narrative, creating temporary social pressure and emotional distress that added complexity to an already challenging situation. Marcus remained largely unaware of this legal battle during the early stages, protected by pain medication and focused on his physical therapy milestones. However, as his cognitive clarity improved and his physical condition stabilized, he began asking questions about family dynamics and expressing confusion about why Jessica's visits had become less frequent and more tense. The decision of when and how to inform Marcus about Jessica's exploitation attempts required careful consideration of his emotional and physical recovery needs. Dr. Sullivan advised that psychological stress could impact his healing process, but she also emphasized his right to be informed about attempts to manipulate his legal and financial affairs. I chose to approach the conversation gradually, beginning with general discussions about the importance of protecting his assets during recovery and gradually introducing more specific information about the protective legal measures that had been implemented. Marcus's initial reaction was disbelief and confusion, followed by anger as he began to understand the scope of Jessica's planning and the implications for his autonomy. Marcus's cognitive clarity and emotional stability during these conversations provided additional evidence contradicting Jessica's claims about his mental incapacity. His ability to understand complex financial and legal concepts, ask pertinent questions about the protective measures, and express appropriate outrage about Jessica's behavior demonstrated that he was fully competent to make decisions about his own affairs. The Adult Protective Services investigation that Judge Thompson had ordered began with investigator Sarah Chen conducting comprehensive interviews with all parties involved in the case. Chen's experience with family financial exploitation cases provided professional perspective on Jessica's activities and their classification under state criminal statutes. Chen's investigation revealed additional concerning behavior that I hadn't previously discovered. Jessica had contacted multiple financial institutions beyond those I knew about, attempting to gather information about Marcus's accounts and investment holdings. Her inquiries followed a consistent pattern of claiming urgent family authorization while becoming aggressive when professionals requested proper documentation. The APS investigation also uncovered Jessica's attempts to contact Marcus's business clients directly, claiming authority to renegotiate contracts and modify service agreements on his behalf. Several clients had found these approaches suspicious and had contacted David Kim to verify Jessica's authority, which she obviously lacked. Most disturbing was Chen's discovery that Jessica had consulted with multiple attorneys about guardianship procedures, shopping for legal representation that would support her aggressive approach to gaining control over Marcus's affairs. Her consultations revealed detailed planning that extended far beyond the power of attorney document she had initially presented to me. The comprehensive nature of Jessica's planning and the systematic approach she had taken to gathering information about Marcus's assets elevated her activities from opportunistic exploitation to premeditated financial crimes. Chen's professional assessment concluded that Jessica had engaged in textbook financial exploitation planning that warranted criminal prosecution under state statutes. The criminal referral from Adult Protective Services triggered an investigation by Detective Ramon Torres of the Skagit County Sheriff's Office Financial Crimes Unit. Torres's expertise in complex fraud cases provided law enforcement perspective on Jessica's activities and their potential criminal liability. Detective Torres interviewed Jessica formally under caution, giving her the opportunity to explain her activities and provide legitimate justification for her comprehensive asset research and exploitation planning. Jessica's interview, conducted with Preston present as legal counsel, revealed additional incriminating information about her motivations and intentions. During the police interview, Jessica repeatedly contradicted her previous statements about Marcus's condition and prognosis, suggesting that her medical claims had been fabricated to justify her financial activities. When confronted with evidence of her systematic planning, she became defensive and attempted to minimize the scope of her activities while maintaining that everything was motivated by concern for Marcus's welfare. Preston's legal advice during the interview appeared to focus on limiting Jessica's exposure to criminal liability rather than defending the legitimacy of her actions. His cautious approach suggested that even her own attorney recognized the problematic nature of her systematic exploitation planning and the difficulty of providing innocent explanations for her behavior. The police investigation expanded to include analysis of Jessica's electronic communications, revealing email exchanges with potential buyers for Marcus's property and digital research into asset liquidation strategies. Her electronic footprint provided additional evidence of premeditation and comprehensive planning that contradicted claims about responding to urgent medical necessities. Most damaging was Jessica's online research into legal strategies for gaining control over incapacitated family members' assets, including forum discussions about exploiting temporary vulnerabilities and circumventing protective legal measures. Her digital activities revealed a level of calculation and predatory planning that transformed her case from family dispute to serious financial crime. As the criminal investigation progressed, Jessica's behavior became increasingly desperate and erratic. She attempted to contact Marcus directly through hospital staff, claiming emergency family situations that required immediate financial decisions. When hospital security prevented these unauthorized visits, she escalated to making false reports about Marcus's medical care to state regulatory agencies. Her pattern of making false official reports to pressure medical professionals and obstruct protective legal measures demonstrated escalating criminal behavior that extended beyond financial exploitation into interference with medical care and abuse of regulatory systems. Each false report created additional evidence of her willingness to harm Marcus's interests to achieve her financial goals. The mounting evidence of Jessica's systematic exploitation planning and escalating criminal behavior culminated in Detective Torres presenting the case to the Skagit County Prosecutor's Office for formal charges. The comprehensive documentation of her activities, electronic evidence of premeditation, and testimony from multiple professionals created a compelling case for prosecution under multiple criminal statutes. District Attorney Catherine Reynolds reviewed the case personally given its complexity and the serious nature of the financial exploitation charges. Reynolds' office specialized in crimes against vulnerable adults and recognized the precedential importance of prosecuting family members who exploited temporary incapacitation for financial gain. The prosecutor's decision to file formal charges against Jessica included multiple felony counts, attempted theft in the first degree for her systematic planning to steal Marcus's assets, identity theft for her fraudulent representations to financial institutions, and criminal impersonation for her attempts to act with unauthorized legal authority on his behalf. The formal charges also included misdemeanor counts for filing false reports with regulatory agencies and interfering with medical care through her harassment of healthcare providers. The comprehensive nature of the charges reflected the scope of Jessica's criminal activities and sent a clear message about consequences for exploiting vulnerable family members. Jessica's arrest warrant was executed at her Linwood home early on a Tuesday morning, creating maximum impact for someone who had built her reputation around being a responsible family member and community volunteer. The public nature of her arrest and the serious felony charges destroyed the carefully maintained image she had used to gain trust and access to Marcus's affairs. The news of Jessica's arrest spread quickly through our extended family and social networks, validating my protective actions while exposing the extent of her deceptive behavior to people who had initially supported her narrative. Family members who had questioned my interference with Jessica's family assistance were forced to confront evidence of her systematic exploitation planning and criminal intent. Marcus's reaction to learning about Jessica's arrest was complex, combining relief that the threat to his autonomy had been eliminated with grief over the destruction of his relationship with his sister. His emotional processing of Jessica's betrayal required professional support from a counselor specializing in family trauma and exploitation recovery. The psychological impact on Marcus extended beyond the immediate shock of discovering Jessica's exploitation scheme. He struggled with questions about how long she had been planning to exploit his vulnerability and whether her previous expressions of family concern had been genuine or calculated manipulation. The violation of family trust created wounds that would require time and professional support to heal. However, Marcus's emotional resilience and strong support network facilitated his psychological recovery alongside his physical rehabilitation. His ability to understand and process the complexity of Jessica's betrayal while maintaining his focus on recovery goals demonstrated the mental competency that Jessica had falsely claimed was compromised by his injuries. The legal proceedings against Jessica moved forward with mechanical inevitability as her defense team struggled to counter the overwhelming evidence of systematic exploitation planning. Preston's initial strategy of portraying her actions as legitimate family assistance collapsed when confronted with electronic evidence of her research into asset liquidation and guardianship manipulation. The preliminary hearing revealed the full scope of the evidence against Jessica, including audio recordings of her explicit threats, electronic communications about property sales, and testimony from multiple professionals documenting her suspicious activities. The judge's decision to bind her over for trial on all charges reflected the strength of the prosecution's case and the serious nature of her criminal behavior. Jessica's mounting legal expenses and the public exposure of her exploitation scheme created additional pressures that revealed her true priorities. Instead of focusing on rebuilding family relationships or supporting Marcus's recovery, she became obsessed with minimizing her criminal exposure and preserving her reputation in the community. Her continued focus on self-preservation rather than family healing provided final confirmation of her fundamental selfishness and lack of genuine concern for Marcus's welfare. The sister who had claimed to be motivated by love and concern was revealed to be a calculating predator willing to destroy family bonds for financial gain. The transformation of our family dynamics was complete. Jessica had permanently damaged her relationships with both Marcus and me through her exploitation attempts, while simultaneously exposing herself to serious criminal consequences that would affect her life for years to come. Her actions had achieved the opposite of every goal she claimed to pursue. Instead of family financial security, she faced personal financial ruin. Instead of family harmony, she had created permanent estrangement. Instead of protecting Marcus, she had caused him additional trauma during his recovery. The woman who had approached me with crocodile tears and fraudulent documents, claiming that Marcus was suffering too much to protect himself, had discovered that her own suffering was just beginning. While Marcus continued his steady recovery surrounded by genuine support, Jessica faced the consequences of choosing predatory exploitation over family loyalty. She had declared war on her brother's autonomy and dignity, awakening a protective force she was completely unprepared to face, and now she would spend years dealing with the legal, financial, and social consequences of her devastating choices. The trial proceedings began 6 months after Jessica's arrest, allowing sufficient time for Marcus to complete his physical recovery and participate fully in the legal process. His transformation during those months was remarkable, both physically and emotionally. The broken, vulnerable man Jessica had attempted to exploit had been replaced by someone stronger and more determined than ever before. Marcus's testimony during the trial was the most powerful evidence against Jessica's exploitation scheme. Speaking clearly and confidently from the witness stand, he described his shock at discovering the extent of his sister's planning to control his assets permanently. His emotional testimony about the betrayal of family trust resonated powerfully with the jury, 12 community members who understood the sacred nature of family loyalty and the devastating impact of its violation. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically over 8 days, with each witness and piece of evidence building an inescapable narrative of systematic predatory behavior. Patricia Reeves testified about Jessica's aggressive attempts to access Marcus's financial accounts, while Dr. Sullivan explained how Jessica had repeatedly sought medical justification for pessimistic prognoses that contradicted clinical evidence. Detective Torres presented the electronic evidence that revealed the full scope of Jessica's exploitation planning, including her online research into asset liquidation strategies and legal methods for gaining control over incapacitated family members. The digital trail painted a picture of calculated predation that extended far beyond opportunistic exploitation into carefully orchestrated financial crime. The defense team's strategy focused on portraying Jessica as a concerned sister who had made poor decisions under emotional stress, rather than a calculating predator. This approach required minimizing the systematic nature of her planning, while emphasizing her genuine love for Marcus and her intentions to protect his interests during a vulnerable period. However, the overwhelming evidence of premeditation and the comprehensive nature of Jessica's exploitation scheme made this defense strategy largely ineffective. The jury heard recorded conversations where Jessica explicitly threatened to seek guardianship if voluntary cooperation couldn't be achieved, revealing her willingness to use legal coercion to gain control over Marcus's affairs. Jessica's own testimony proved particularly damaging to her defense. Under cross-examination, she struggled to explain the timing of her various activities and the disconnect between her pessimistic claims about Marcus's prognosis and the actual medical evidence. Her defensive responses and inability to provide innocent explanations for her behavior reinforced the prosecution's narrative of calculated exploitation. The most devastating moment in Jessica's testimony came when prosecutor Catherine Reynolds asked her to explain why she had researched property sales and assisted living facilities before consulting with Marcus about his recovery goals and preferences. Jessica's stammering response revealed that she had never actually discussed her plans with Marcus, demonstrating that her actions were motivated by her own financial interests rather than his welfare. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all major charges. The speed of their decision reflected the overwhelming nature of the evidence and the clarity of Jessica's criminal intent. The conviction on felony charges of attempted theft and identity theft carried potential sentences of up to 5 years in state prison. Judge Thompson scheduled Jessica's sentencing hearing for 3 weeks after the verdict, allowing time for the preparation of victim impact statements and pre-sentence investigation reports. The sentencing phase would determine whether Jessica would receive the maximum penalties or benefit from mitigating factors such as her lack of prior criminal history. Marcus chose to deliver his victim impact statement personally, describing the profound violation of trust he had experienced and the ongoing psychological effects of discovering his sister's exploitation scheme. His statement emphasized not just the financial harm that had been prevented, but the emotional trauma of learning that someone he loved had viewed his suffering as an opportunity for personal gain. My own victim impact statement focused on the broader implications of Jessica's actions for family relationships and the protection of vulnerable adults. I described how her systematic exploitation planning had violated fundamental principles of family loyalty while potentially endangering other vulnerable individuals who might lack adequate protection from predatory relatives. The pre-sentence investigation revealed additional information about Jessica's financial motivations that hadn't emerged during the trial. Her credit card debt exceeded $40,000, and she had been facing potential foreclosure on her Linwood home due to missed mortgage payments. The financial pressures that had motivated her exploitation scheme were even more severe than we had initially realized. Judge Thompson's sentencing decision reflected both the serious nature of Jessica's crimes and the mitigating factors in her personal situation. She sentenced Jessica to 18 months in state prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation, along with restitution requirements and mandatory participation in financial counseling programs. The prison sentence sent a clear message about consequences for exploiting vulnerable family members, while the probation conditions included provisions preventing Jessica from serving in any financial management role for other family members or vulnerable adults. The court recognized that her predatory behavior represented a pattern that required ongoing supervision to prevent future victimization. Jessica's reaction to the sentencing was a mixture of shock and self-pity that revealed her continued inability to accept responsibility for her actions. Even facing incarceration, she maintained that her intentions had been misunderstood and that the legal system had failed to recognize her genuine concern for Marcus's welfare. Her husband Brandon filed for divorce during her incarceration, citing irreconcilable differences but clearly motivated by his desire to protect himself and their daughters from the financial and social consequences of Jessica's criminal behavior. The divorce proceedings revealed that Brandon had been unaware of the extent of Jessica's exploitation planning and felt betrayed by her deception. The dissolution of Jessica's marriage and the permanent damage to her relationship with her children represented additional consequences of her predatory choices that extended far beyond the formal legal penalties. Her daughters struggled to understand how their mother could have attempted to exploit their uncle during his recovery from serious injuries. Marcus's own recovery continued to progress remarkably during the legal proceedings. His physical therapy had restored full mobility and strength, allowing him to return to his consulting business with renewed energy and focus. More importantly, his emotional resilience had been strengthened by successfully defending himself against exploitation with the support of people who genuinely cared about his welfare. The experience of being targeted for exploitation had given Marcus new perspective on the vulnerability that many people face and the importance of protective legal measures for those who lack adequate support systems. He began volunteering with organizations that assisted vulnerable adults in recognizing and preventing financial exploitation by family members and caregivers. Marcus's decision to transform his traumatic experience into advocacy for others demonstrated his emotional strength and commitment to preventing similar victimization. His public speaking about family financial exploitation helped educate community members about warning signs and protective strategies while honoring the painful lessons he had learned through Jessica's betrayal. The restoration of Marcus's full autonomy and the successful prosecution of Jessica's exploitation scheme validated every decision I had made during the crisis. The protective legal measures that had seemed extreme to some family members were revealed to be necessary and proportionate responses to a serious criminal threat. My own professional life was enriched by the experience of successfully advocating for a vulnerable family member against systematic exploitation. The skills I had developed as a healthcare advocate proved transferable to protecting loved ones from predatory behavior, while the legal knowledge I gained during Marcus's case enhanced my ability to assist other vulnerable patients and families. The case attracted attention from legal professionals and advocacy organizations interested in the successful prosecution of family financial exploitation. Rebecca Martinez used our case as an example in training programs for attorneys working with vulnerable adults, while Detective Torres incorporated our experience into educational materials for law enforcement officers investigating financial crimes against family members. The broader impact of Jessica's prosecution extended beyond our immediate family to create precedent for holding family members accountable for exploitation attempts against vulnerable relatives. The successful conviction demonstrated that emotional manipulation and claims of family concern would not protect predators from criminal consequences when their actions constituted systematic financial exploitation. Adult Protective Services investigator Victoria Chen noted that our case had become a model for comprehensive documentation and multi-agency coordination in family exploitation cases. The systematic approach we had taken to gathering evidence and building professional alliances had created a template for protecting other vulnerable adults from similar predatory behavior. The community response to Jessica's prosecution was overwhelmingly supportive of the legal action taken to protect Marcus from exploitation. Local media coverage emphasized the importance of recognizing financial exploitation within families and the courage required to pursue legal remedies against predatory relatives. The extended family relationships that had been strained by Jessica's manipulation campaign gradually healed as the truth about her systematic exploitation planning became clear. Family members who had initially questioned my protective actions acknowledged that they had been deceived by Jessica's false narrative about family cooperation and Marcus's supposed incapacity. The financial restitution ordered as part of Jessica's sentence included compensation for legal expenses and other costs associated with defending against her exploitation scheme. While the monetary recovery was important, the validation of our protective actions and the establishment of legal precedent were far more significant outcomes. Marcus's relationship with his business partner David Kim was strengthened by their shared experience of recognizing and resisting Jessica's attempts to manipulate Marcus's business interests. David's refusal to cooperate with Jessica's premature buyout proposals had been crucial in preserving Marcus's consulting business during his recovery period. The insurance company that Jessica had contacted about permanent disability benefits used our case as an example in training programs designed to help representatives recognize potential fraud attempts. Maria Santos became an advocate within her organization for more comprehensive screening procedures when family members made inquiries that contradicted medical evidence. Dr. Sullivan incorporated lessons from Jessica's case into her medical practice, developing protocols for recognizing when family members might be exploiting patients' temporary vulnerabilities for financial gain. Her experience with Jessica's manipulation attempts informed her approach to family conferences and decision-making processes involving injured patients. The long-term psychological effects on Marcus included a heightened awareness of manipulation tactics and a stronger commitment to maintaining appropriate boundaries in family relationships. While he grieved the loss of his relationship with Jessica, he recognized that her exploitation attempts had revealed fundamental character flaws that predated his accident. Marcus's decision to relocate to a smaller property closer to my home reflected his desire to maintain strong family connections with people who had demonstrated genuine loyalty during his crisis. His new living situation provided security and community while allowing him to continue his independent lifestyle and professional activities. The therapeutic process that helped Marcus cope with Jessica's betrayal also strengthened our sibling relationship and deepened our mutual respect and trust. The crisis had revealed the strength of our family bond while eliminating the toxic influence of someone who had disguised predatory behavior as family concern. 2 years after Jessica's conviction, Marcus established a foundation dedicated to educating vulnerable adults and their families about financial exploitation prevention. The foundation's work honored his painful experience while creating positive outcomes for other potential victims of family predation. The Foundation's educational programs emphasized the importance of advanced planning for temporary incapacitation, including the preparation of appropriate legal documents and the identification of trustworthy advocates who could provide protection during vulnerable periods. Marcus's personal story provided powerful motivation for individuals to take protective measures before crisis situations arose. My own advocacy work expanded to include consultation with other families facing similar exploitation threats from predatory relatives. The expertise I had developed during Marcus's case proved valuable in helping other protective family members navigate complex legal and emotional challenges while defending vulnerable loved ones. The network of professional relationships that had been crucial in protecting Marcus evolved into ongoing collaborative efforts to improve systems for vulnerable adult protection. Our case had demonstrated the effectiveness of coordinated multi-agency responses to family exploitation threats. Jessica's eventual release from prison after serving 14 months of her sentence was accompanied by strict probation conditions that prohibited contact with Marcus or involvement in financial management for other family members. Her parole officer maintained regular communication with both Marcus and me to ensure compliance with protective orders. The supervised visitation arrangements that allowed Jessica limited contact with her daughters were carefully structured to prevent any discussion of financial matters or attempts to manipulate family relationships. The girls' emotional recovery from their mother's criminal behavior required ongoing therapeutic support and strong boundaries. Brandon's successful divorce and custody arrangements protected Jessica's daughters from ongoing exposure to their mother's manipulative behavior while ensuring they maintained relationships with extended family members who provided positive influences. The girls' resilience and adaptation demonstrated their strength in overcoming family trauma. The permanent restraining orders that prevented Jessica from accessing Marcus's property or financial information provided ongoing security against future exploitation attempts. The legal protections would remain in effect indefinitely, ensuring that Jessica could never again threaten Marcus's autonomy or financial security. Marcus's complete recovery and return to full independence validated every decision made during his crisis period. His successful resistance to Jessica's exploitation scheme had preserved not only his assets but his dignity and autonomy. The sister who had claimed he was suffering too much to protect himself had discovered that her own suffering would far exceed anything Marcus had experienced during his recovery. The woman who had approached me with fraudulent documents and crocodile tears claiming that Marcus needed family protection had learned that family protection meant defending him against predators like herself. Her systematic exploitation planning had awakened protective forces she was completely unprepared to face, resulting in consequences that would affect her life permanently. Marcus's transformation from vulnerable patient to empowered advocate represented the ultimate triumph over Jessica's exploitation scheme. The brother she had attempted to exploit had become a powerful voice for vulnerable adult protection, ensuring that her predatory behavior would never succeed against other potential victims. The case that began with Jessica's confident assertion that Marcus was suffering too much to make rational decisions concluded with her discovering that her own suffering would be far more severe and long-lasting than anything her brother had endured. The family predator had become the permanent outcast while the intended victim had emerged stronger and more determined than ever before. The ripple effects of Jessica's conviction extended far beyond our immediate family, creating waves of change that touched numerous lives and institutions throughout the Pacific Northwest. 3 years after her sentencing, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected ways that protecting Marcus had transformed not only our family dynamics but entire systems designed to safeguard vulnerable adults from exploitation. The foundation Marcus established had grown from a small advocacy organization into a regional resource center that served families facing similar crises across Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. The Marcus Chen Foundation for Vulnerable Adult Protection had received federal grants to develop training programs for healthcare workers, legal professionals, and law enforcement officers who encountered financial exploitation cases involving family members. My role as the Foundation's Director of Family Advocacy had evolved naturally from my experience protecting Marcus during his crisis. The position allowed me to use my nursing background and hard-earned expertise in exploitation prevention to assist other families navigating the complex intersection of medical vulnerability and predatory behavior by relatives. Each case that came to our attention carried echoes of Jessica's systematic approach to exploiting Marcus's temporary incapacitation, but the specific circumstances varied dramatically. We had assisted families dealing with adult children who attempted to seize control of elderly parents' assets during hospitalizations, spouses who exploited partners' cognitive decline for financial gain, and siblings who manipulated inheritance distributions by claiming medical decision-making authority. The pattern of predatory behavior remained remarkably consistent across different family configurations and economic circumstances. Exploiters typically identified temporary vulnerabilities, created false urgency around financial decisions, positioned themselves as the only viable solution to fabricated crises, and attempted to isolate victims from other potential advocates who might question their motivations. One particularly memorable case involved Elena Rodriguez, a 72-year-old retired teacher whose daughter-in-law had attempted to gain control of her assets during recovery from hip replacement surgery. The daughter-in-law, Maria, had used nearly identical tactics to Jessica's exploitation scheme, including researching assisted living facilities, contacting financial institutions with false claims of authorization, and attempting to isolate Elena from her son and other family members who might interfere with the asset seizure plans. Elena's son Carlos had contacted our foundation after discovering Maria's activities through suspicious bank statements and unexplained changes to his mother's financial accounts. The parallels to Marcus's situation were striking, but the outcome demonstrated how effective intervention could be when families had access to appropriate resources and legal guidance. Working with Elena's case reinforced my understanding of how predators exploited not just individual vulnerabilities but systemic weaknesses in the institutions designed to protect vulnerable adults. Financial institutions often lacked adequate protocols for verifying family members' authority to act on behalf of temporarily incapacitated account holders, while healthcare facilities frequently failed to recognize signs of financial exploitation occurring alongside medical treatment. Our foundation's training programs address these institutional vulnerabilities by educating professionals about red flags that indicated potential exploitation and providing frameworks for coordinated responses that protected vulnerable individuals while respecting legitimate family involvement in medical and financial decision-making. The success of these educational initiatives led to invitations to present our model at national conferences on elder abuse prevention and vulnerable adult protection. Marcus's willingness to share his personal story of surviving exploitation attempts provided powerful testimony about the importance of systematic protective measures and coordinated professional responses. During one particularly impactful presentation at the National Conference on Elder Justice, Marcus described the moment he realized that Jessica's concern for his wife had been entirely fabricated to justify her asset seizure plans. His emotional testimony about the violation of family trust resonated with audience members who had encountered similar cases in their professional practices. The conference presentation also highlighted the crucial role that trained advocates could play in recognizing and countering exploitation schemes before significant financial harm occurred. Many professionals in the audience expressed surprise at the sophisticated nature of Jessica's planning and the systematic approach she had taken to gaining control over Marcus's assets. Sarah Kim, a geriatrician from Seattle who attended Marcus's presentation, later implemented new protocols in her practice for identifying potential financial exploitation by family members. Her approach included routine screening questions about family financial involvement and referral procedures for patients whose relatives exhibited suspicious behavior regarding asset management during medical crises. The medical community's growing awareness of family financial exploitation led to collaborative research projects examining the intersection between temporary medical incapacitation and predatory behavior by relatives. Our foundation partnered with the University of Washington School of Medicine to study patterns of exploitation attempts during various types of medical recovery periods. The research revealed that exploitation attempts were most common during recoveries from accidents, surgeries, and acute illnesses that temporarily impaired victims' ability to monitor their financial affairs while leaving their cognitive abilities largely intact. Predators seemed to target situations where victims were physically vulnerable but mentally competent, creating opportunities for exploitation while minimizing the risk of immediate detection. These research findings informed the development of new protective protocols that hospitals and rehabilitation facilities could implement to safeguard patients from financial exploitation during vulnerable periods. The protocols included family education about appropriate involvement in financial decision-making, screening procedures for identifying potential exploitation, and referral pathways for protective legal intervention when necessary. The legal community also embraced the lessons learned from Jessica's prosecution, with several law schools incorporating our case into their curricula on elder law and vulnerable adult protection. The systematic documentation approach that Rebecca Martinez and I had developed became a model for other attorneys handling similar exploitation cases. Rebecca herself had become a recognized expert in family financial exploitation law, frequently consulted by attorneys across the region who encountered similar cases. Her success in prosecuting Jessica's exploitation scheme had established important legal precedents that strengthened protective measures for other vulnerable adults facing predatory behavior by family members. The precedential value of Jessica's conviction extended beyond the specific charges she faced to broader questions about family authority during medical crises and the legal standards for determining when family involvement constituted exploitation rather than legitimate assistance. Courts throughout the Pacific Northwest began citing our case when evaluating similar allegations of family financial predation. Judge Thompson, who had presided over both the emergency protective hearing and Jessica's criminal trial, incorporated lessons from our case into judicial education programs about recognizing and responding to financial exploitation within families. Her experience with Jessica's systematic exploitation planning informed her approach to subsequent cases involving similar allegations. The criminal justice system's response to Jessica's case also influenced prosecution strategies in other family exploitation cases. District Attorney Catherine Reynolds used our case as an example when training prosecutors about the importance of comprehensive evidence gathering and multi-agency coordination in building strong cases against family predators. Detective Torres became a sought-after trainer for law enforcement officers investigating financial crimes against vulnerable adults, using Jessica's case to illustrate how electronic evidence and systematic documentation could counter defendants' claims about innocent family assistance motivations. The broader law enforcement community's interest in our case reflected growing recognition that family financial exploitation represented a significant criminal threat that required specialized investigative techniques and coordinated responses. The success of Jessica's prosecution demonstrated that family relationships would not protect predators from criminal consequences when their behavior constituted systematic exploitation. Adult protective services agencies throughout the region adopted elements of the investigative approach that Sarah Chen had used in Jessica's case, particularly the emphasis on documenting patterns of predatory behavior rather than focusing solely on completed financial transactions. This shift in investigative focus allowed APS workers to intervene before significant financial harm occurred. The professional network that had been crucial in protecting Marcus evolved into ongoing collaborative relationships that enhanced protection for other vulnerable adults facing similar threats. The model of coordinated response involving medical professionals, financial institutions, legal advocates, and law enforcement became a template for other communities seeking to improve their protective capabilities. Patricia Reeves, Marcus's financial advisor, became an advocate within her industry for enhanced training about recognizing signs of financial exploitation by family members. Her experience with Jessica's suspicious inquiries informed new protocols that her firm implemented for evaluating requests from family members seeking access to clients' accounts during medical crises. The financial services industry's growing awareness of family exploitation tactics led to the development of new screening procedures and protective measures that balanced legitimate family financial assistance with safeguards against predatory behavior. These industry changes reflected recognition that financial institutions played crucial roles in either enabling or preventing exploitation of vulnerable account holders. Community education programs developed by our foundation reached thousands of individuals throughout the region, providing information about recognizing signs of financial exploitation and developing protective plans before crisis situations arose. The programs emphasized the importance of advanced planning for temporary incapacitation, including the preparation of appropriate legal documents and identification of trustworthy advocates. Marcus's personal story became a powerful tool for motivating community members to take protective measures before they became vulnerable to exploitation. His willingness to share the painful details of Jessica's betrayal helped other families recognize similar warning signs and seek appropriate protective assistance. The educational programs also addressed the emotional aspects of family financial exploitation, acknowledging the complex grief and trauma that victims experienced when relatives violated their trust for financial gain. The therapeutic support services that our foundation provided helped exploitation survivors process their experiences while developing strategies for rebuilding their lives and relationships. My own therapeutic journey through the aftermath of Jessica's exploitation attempts had been facilitated by Dr. Michael Torres, a psychologist specializing in family trauma and betrayal recovery. His guidance helped me process the complex emotions surrounding my sister's predatory behavior while maintaining my focus on protecting Marcus and preventing similar victimization of other vulnerable adults. The therapeutic work revealed how Jessica's exploitation scheme had affected not just Marcus but our entire family system, creating ripple effects that extended to relationships with other relatives, family traditions, and basic assumptions about trust and loyalty within families. The healing process required rebuilding family relationships on new foundations that acknowledged the reality of Jessica's predatory behavior while preserving connections with other family members who had not participated in her exploitation schemes. Marcus's own therapeutic journey included processing not just the immediate trauma of discovering Jessica's exploitation plans but the broader implications of learning that someone he had loved and trusted had viewed his suffering as an opportunity for personal gain. The violation of family bonds created wounds that required ongoing attention and professional support. The therapeutic support services that our foundation provided to other exploitation survivors drew on the lessons learned from our own healing journey, offering both individual counseling and support groups for families dealing with similar betrayals. The shared experiences of exploitation survivors created powerful bonds and mutual support networks that facilitated recovery and advocacy. Jessica's life after prison had been marked by ongoing consequences that extended far beyond her formal legal penalties. Her criminal conviction had destroyed her career prospects in bookkeeping and financial services, while her reputation in the community remained permanently damaged by the public exposure of her exploitation scheme. The divorce from Brandon had been finalized during her incarceration, leaving her with limited financial resources and restricted access to her daughters. The supervised visitation arrangements continued under court oversight, with strict conditions prohibiting any discussion of financial matters or attempts to manipulate family relationships. Her daughters, now teenagers, had thrived under Brandon's primary custody and the support of extended family members who provided positive influences. Their resilience in overcoming their mother's criminal behavior demonstrated the strength that children could develop when protected from ongoing exposure to manipulative and predatory behavior. Brandon's remarriage to a teacher who worked with at-risk youth had provided additional stability and support for the girls while creating a family environment that emphasized integrity, honesty, and respect for others. The new family structure offered healing opportunities that would have been impossible if Jessica had maintained her role as an active parent. The permanent restraining orders that prevented Jessica from contacting Marcus or accessing information about his affairs provided ongoing security against future exploitation attempts. The legal protections were comprehensive enough to prevent any direct or indirect contact that might constitute harassment or attempted manipulation. Marcus's decision to relocate closer to my home had facilitated our ongoing collaborative work with the foundation while providing him with enhanced security and family support. His new living situation balanced independence with community connections, allowing him to maintain his autonomy while benefiting from strong family bonds. The property he had purchased was smaller than his previous home but perfectly suited to his current lifestyle and security needs. The house featured modern security systems and was located in a community that provided additional layers of protection against unwanted contact or surveillance. Marcus's consulting business had not only recovered from the disruption caused by Jessica's exploitation attempts but had grown significantly as a result of his increased focus and determination. His experience surviving predatory behavior had given him new perspective on resilience and strategic thinking that enhanced his professional effectiveness. The business partnership with David Kim had been strengthened by their shared experience of recognizing and resisting Jessica's manipulation attempts. David's refusal to cooperate with her premature buyout proposals had preserved Marcus's business interests while demonstrating the importance of professional integrity and loyalty. Our family's experience with Jessica's exploitation scheme had created a legacy of protection and advocacy that extended far beyond our immediate circumstances. The Foundation's work continued to expand, reaching new communities and developing innovative approaches to preventing financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. The annual conference that our foundation hosted had become a premier gathering for professionals working in vulnerable adult protection, drawing attendees from across North America who sought to learn from our experience and share their own innovations in exploitation prevention. Marcus's keynote address at each conference provided inspiration and motivation for professionals who often felt overwhelmed by the scope of financial exploitation they encountered in their practices. His message of resilience and recovery offered hope to both professionals and exploitation survivors who attended the events. The scholarship program that our foundation established provided financial assistance for vulnerable adults who needed legal representation but lacked resources to hire adequate counsel. The scholarships honored the memory of what our family had almost lost while providing practical assistance to others facing similar threats. The research initiatives that our foundation supported continued to generate new knowledge about exploitation patterns, prevention strategies, and recovery processes that informed best practices across multiple professional disciplines. The evidence-based approach to protection reflected our commitment to systematic improvement rather than relying solely on individual advocacy efforts. Looking toward the future, our foundation planned to expand its reach to international audiences, sharing the lessons learned from Jessica's case with professionals working in countries where family exploitation of vulnerable adults was an emerging concern. The universal nature of predatory behavior within families suggested that our protective strategies would have relevance across cultural and legal contexts. The woman who had once knocked on my door with fraudulent documents and false tears, claiming that Marcus was suffering too much to protect himself, had inadvertently created a powerful force for protection and justice that would benefit countless vulnerable individuals for years to come. Her predatory behavior had awakened capabilities and determination that transformed not just our family but entire systems designed to safeguard those who temporarily could not safeguard themselves. Jessica's assertion that Marcus was suffering too much had proven prophetic in ways she never intended. While his physical suffering had been temporary and treatable, her own suffering would continue indefinitely through the consequences of her calculated betrayal and the positive changes that her exploitation scheme had ultimately inspired. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.